I'm Jessica Martinez, 32 years old, and I never imagined I'd watch my own sister's hands shake as she signed a confession at the Phoenix Police Department. 2 years earlier, Amanda had systematically stolen my identity, racking up over $100,000 in fraudulent loans and credit cards, while I was building what I thought was an unshakable financial future. But as Detective Sarah Williams slid the paperwork across the metal table and Amanda's pen trembled against the document, I realized that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me that as a senior financial analyst specializing in fraud detection, I had been completely blind to the elaborate scheme happening right under my nose, orchestrated by someone who had shared my childhood bedroom and knew every detail of my personal information. Growing up in the sun-baked suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, our family occupied a modest ranch-style house on Maple Drive, where the desert heat seemed to amplify every tension that simmered beneath our seemingly normal facade. The Martinez household operated under an unspoken hierarchy that had been established long before I understood what favoritism meant. Our father, Bob, spent his days managing construction crews under the relentless Arizona sun, his weathered hands and patient demeanor reflecting a man who preferred building things to confronting uncomfortable truths. Mom, Linda, worked part-time at the local elementary school, her nurturing instincts somehow always gravitating toward my younger sister Amanda, who everyone called Mandy, as if the nickname could soften the edges of her increasingly problematic behavior. The contrast between Mandy and me was apparent from our earliest years, manifesting in ways that would later prove prophetic of our adult relationship. While I methodically organized my school supplies each August, color-coding folders and maintaining detailed homework planners, Mandy approached each school year with the same chaotic energy she brought to everything else. I remember sitting at our shared desk, carefully balancing my budget from my weekend babysitting jobs, calculating exactly how much I could save toward my college fund, while Mandy would breeze in with shopping bags from the mall, having somehow convinced our parents to advance her allowance for the third time that month. Even then, money seemed to slip through her fingers like water through a sieve, yet she never appeared worried about the consequences of her spending habits. Our parents' reaction to these fundamental differences in our personalities established patterns that would haunt our family dynamics for decades. When I brought home report cards filled with A's and academic achievement awards, Dad would nod approvingly, and Mom would dutifully place the certificates in a folder that quickly found its way to a forgotten drawer. But when Mandy struggled academically, or faced consequences for her impulsive decisions, both parents would spring into action with tutoring sessions, meetings with teachers, and elaborate explanations about how she just needed more support to reach her potential. The message was clear and painful: success was expected from me, and therefore unremarkable, while Mandy's struggles were met with compassion and immediate intervention. The financial aspect of this favoritism became increasingly apparent as we moved through high school. I worked at a local coffee shop every weekend and most weekday afternoons, saving religiously for college while maintaining my grades and participating in academic clubs. My parents praised my work ethic in abstract terms, but never offered to help with my college expenses, operating under the assumption that my responsibility and capability meant I could handle everything independently. Meanwhile, Mandy's part-time job at the mall lasted exactly 3 weeks before she quit, claiming the manager was unfair and the work was beneath her. Rather than insisting she find another position, our parents simply absorbed her expenses, justifying their decision by explaining that Mandy was still figuring herself out and needed time to find her path. The pattern extended beyond money, into every aspect of our family relationships. When I successfully organized and executed a fundraising campaign for our school's debate team, earning recognition from the district, the achievement merited a brief mention at Sunday dinner before conversation shifted to Mandy's latest drama with her friend group. But when Mandy faced suspension for skipping classes, the entire family mobilized to appeal the decision, with lengthy discussions about the unfairness of the school's policies and the need to protect Mandy's future opportunities. I learned early that competence was its own prison, creating expectations that left no room for mistakes or needs of my own. The summer before my senior year of high school, an incident occurred that crystallized everything I had been observing about our family's dysfunction, but couldn't yet articulate. I had been saving for months to attend a prestigious summer program for students interested in business and finance, a 3-week intensive that cost $800, including room and board. The program represented everything I was working toward: a chance to network with like-minded students and gain exposure to career possibilities that no one in our family had ever explored. I had earned every dollar through my coffee shop job, carefully tracking my progress toward the goal and making sacrifices to reach the required amount by the deadline. 2 weeks before the program was scheduled to begin, I discovered that the money was missing from my savings account. Our family operated on an informal system where we all had access to each other's banking information for emergencies, a setup that had never seemed problematic until that moment. When I checked my account balance online and saw the devastating zero, my first assumption was that there had been some kind of error or fraudulent activity from an outside source. The possibility that someone in my own family had accessed my account never occurred to me until I found the withdrawal slip in Mandy's room, along with shopping bags containing clothes that cost far more than her typical purchases. Confronting Mandy about the theft was my first real glimpse into the person she would become as an adult, a preview of the justification tactics and emotional manipulation that would later devastate our entire family. Rather than acknowledging what she had done, or showing any remorse, she immediately launched into a defensive explanation about how she had needed the money for something important, and had planned to pay me back before I even noticed. The something important turned out to be a shopping spree to buy an outfit for a party thrown by the popular kids at school, a social opportunity she claimed was crucial for her self-esteem and future happiness. In her mind, my summer program was just an act.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Academic thing that I could do anytime, while her social needs were urgent and couldn't wait. When I brought the theft to our parents' attention, expecting swift justice and a plan for restitution, their response revealed the depth of the family's dysfunction and foreshadowed the enablement that would continue for years to come. Rather than holding Mandy accountable for stealing from her sister, they focused on finding a solution that would minimize conflict and allow both daughters to get what they wanted. Dad worked overtime for 2 weeks to earn the money to send me to my program, while Mom took on additional hours at the school to cover Mandy's shopping expenses retroactively. The theft was reframed as a misunderstanding, a family emergency that required everyone to pull together, rather than a violation of trust that demanded consequences. The message sent by this resolution was profound and lasting. Mandy's impulses and desires were legitimate needs that justified any behavior, while my goals and boundaries were negotiable obstacles to family harmony. More damaging was the implicit suggestion that my hard work and savings were somehow family resources available for redistribution, rather than personal achievements that deserved protection. I learned that being responsible and successful meant becoming a resource for others rather than building security for myself, a lesson that would leave me vulnerable to much greater betrayals in the years to come. Despite this painful introduction to Mandy's willingness to prioritize her wants over my well-being, I continued to believe that our relationship could improve as we matured into adulthood. The optimism of youth and the deep human need to believe in family loyalty convinced me that the summer program incident was an aberration, a momentary lapse in judgment that didn't reflect who Mandy truly was, or who she could become. I told myself that once she experienced more of the world, and faced real consequences for her actions, she would develop the empathy and accountability that seemed missing from her teenage personality. College provided a natural distance from these family dynamics, allowing me to focus on my studies and career preparation, without constant exposure to the favoritism and dysfunction that had shaped my childhood. I threw myself into my accounting and finance coursework with the same methodical intensity I had brought to high school, graduating magna cum laude with a job offer from Pinnacle Financial Services, a respected firm specializing in corporate finance and fraud prevention. The irony of specializing in fraud detection, while remaining blind to the patterns of deception in my own family, would later seem almost absurd, but at the time, I was simply grateful to find professional success that validated my years of hard work and sacrifice. Meanwhile, Mandy's path through young adulthood followed the chaotic trajectory that anyone familiar with her teenage years might have predicted. She enrolled in community college with great fanfare and parental support, only to drop out after one semester when the workload conflicted with her social life and part-time job at a trendy boutique. The job itself lasted only slightly longer, ending when she was caught giving unauthorized discounts to her friends and taking merchandise without proper documentation. Each setback was met with family understanding and financial support, reinforcing the message that consequences were temporary inconveniences rather than learning opportunities. By the time I had established myself professionally and purchased my own apartment in downtown Phoenix, Mandy had accumulated a series of failed endeavors and mounting debt that our parents continued to subsidize. She had briefly attempted careers in real estate, cosmetology, and retail management, approaching each opportunity with initial enthusiasm that quickly faded when the reality of consistent effort and accountability set in. Her personal life followed a similar pattern of dramatic highs, followed by devastating lows, including a brief marriage that ended in divorce and left her as a single mother to 8-year-old Rachel, a sweet and intelligent child who deserved far more stability than Mandy's lifestyle provided. The financial pressure of single motherhood seemed to awaken something approaching maturity in Mandy, at least on the surface. She began speaking about the need to get her life together for Rachel's sake, expressing regret about her past mistakes and determination to build a more stable future. Our parents were thrilled by this apparent transformation, pointing to Mandy's new focus as evidence that their patience and support had finally paid off. Even I found myself cautiously optimistic that motherhood might provide the motivation for real change that nothing else had been able to inspire. During this period of apparent growth, Mandy made increasing efforts to rebuild our relationship, reaching out with phone calls and invitations to spend time together in ways that felt genuine and long overdue. She would bring Rachel to visit my apartment, marveling at my success and expressing admiration for what I had accomplished through hard work and careful planning. These conversations felt like the sisterly connection I had always hoped for, filled with genuine interest in my career and apparent respect for the choices I had made. She began asking thoughtful questions about financial planning and budgeting, claiming she wanted to learn from my example and create a more secure future for herself and her daughter. The requests for financial advice gradually evolved into requests for more direct assistance, a progression that felt natural given Mandy's stated commitment to improving her situation. She would mention struggles with daycare costs or car repairs, challenges that any single mother might face, and I found myself offering help in the form of small loans and occasional gifts. The amounts were modest enough that they didn't strain my budget, and Mandy's gratitude seemed sincere, accompanied by detailed plans for how she would pay me back once she achieved the stability she was working toward. For the first time in our adult relationship, I felt like the supportive older sister I had always wanted to be rather than the resentful victim of family dysfunction. This period of renewed closeness coincided with significant positive changes in my own life, creating a sense that our entire family might finally be moving toward healthier dynamics. My career at Pinnacle Financial Services was thriving, with recent promotions recognizing my expertise in identifying fraudulent activity and developing prevention protocols. The work was intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding, providing both personal satisfaction and the financial security I had worked so hard to achieve. My credit score had reached the excellent range, my savings account was growing steadily, and I had begun exploring investment opportunities that would secure my long-term financial future. More importantly, I had begun developing a social life that extended beyond work colleagues and family obligations, joining professional organizations and attending networking events, where I met people who shared my values and ambitions. These relationships were built on mutual respect and common interests rather than historical obligation or family loyalty, providing a refreshing contrast to the complicated dynamics that had always characterized my relationship with Mandy. For the first time, I was experiencing what healthy adult relationships could look like, based on choice rather than circumstance, and sustained by genuine compatibility rather than family duty. The combination of professional success and expanding social connections gave me a new perspective on my family relationships, allowing me to see both their limitations and their potential with greater clarity. I began to believe that my success might actually serve as a positive influence on Mandy, demonstrating that financial stability and personal growth were achievable through consistent effort and good decisions. Rather than seeing our differences as permanent character traits, I started viewing them as temporary circumstances that could change if Mandy received the right support and encouragement from someone who had successfully navigated similar challenges. This optimistic perspective was reinforced by observable changes in Mandy's behavior and priorities, during what I now recognize as the period when she was carefully studying my financial habits and personal information. She had become genuinely interested in my work, asking detailed questions about banking procedures and credit reporting that seemed to reflect a newfound appreciation for financial responsibility. Our conversations often centered around her goals for improving her credit score and building savings, topics that required me to share information about my own financial strategies and account management practices. Looking back, I can see how thoroughly Mandy had researched every aspect of my financial life during this period of apparent sisterly bonding, but at the time, her questions seemed like evidence of personal growth and genuine desire for self-improvement. She knew where I banked, what credit cards I used, how I managed my investment accounts, and even details about my employment verification procedures at Pinnacle Financial Services. This information was shared freely during conversations that felt like mentoring sessions, opportunities for me to help my sister learn from my experience and avoid the financial mistakes that had characterized her past. The tragedy of this period was not just that Mandy was gathering information to commit identity theft, but that my willingness to help her represented the healthiest our relationship had ever been. For the first time since childhood, we were spending time together without drama or crisis, sharing meals and conversations that felt genuinely supportive rather than obligatory. I was proud of the woman I thought Mandy was becoming and excited about the possibility that we might finally develop the close adult relationship that had always seemed impossible given our different personalities and values. Even Rachel benefited from this period of family harmony, spending time with an aunt who could provide stability and positive role modeling while her mother worked on personal growth. I loved having my niece visit my apartment, showing her how organized spaces and consistent routines could create a sense of calm and security that was often missing from her daily life with Mandy. These visits reinforced my belief that our family was finally moving in a positive direction, with everyone benefiting from improved communication and mutual support. The cruel irony was that during the months when I felt most optimistic about our family's future and most proud of my role in supporting Mandy's transformation, she was systematically using my personal information to apply for loans and credit cards that would ultimately total over $100,000 in fraudulent debt. While I was celebrating what I believed was her personal growth and our improved relationship, she was forging documents, impersonating me during verification calls, and building an elaborate financial house of cards that would eventually collapse and destroy both our lives in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came during what should have been a routine quarterly review of my investment portfolio in early June. I had scheduled the appointment with my financial advisor Margaret Coleman to discuss reallocating some assets and exploring new investment opportunities now that my emergency fund had reached a comfortable level. Margaret had been managing my accounts for 3 years, and our meetings typically followed a predictable pattern of reviewing performance, discussing market trends, and making minor adjustments to my long-term strategy. I arrived at her office that Tuesday morning with a folder of documents and a list of questions about emerging market funds, expecting our usual productive conversation about wealth building and retirement planning. Instead, Margaret greeted me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of confusion and concern that immediately put me on edge. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk with unusual formality, and I noticed that her typical array of charts and performance reports had been replaced by a single manila folder that she handled with obvious reluctance. The sterile conference room suddenly felt smaller than usual, and the morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed too bright for the serious tone that had settled over our meeting before it had even begun. Margaret opened the folder and spread several documents across the polished table, each one bearing official letterheads from institutions I recognized, but had never done business with. The papers included credit reports, loan applications, and verification requests, all bearing my name, social security number, and employment information, but detailing financial activities that were completely foreign to me. She explained that her firm's compliance department had flagged unusual activity in my credit profile during their routine background check for a new investment product I had inquired about. Discovering a pattern of recent credit inquiries and new accounts that didn't match my known financial behavior. The shock of seeing my personal information attached to financial products I had never applied for was immediately followed by a more devastating realization about the scope and sophistication of the fraud. According to the credit reports spread across Margaret's desk, someone had successfully opened 3 personal loans totaling $45,000, 4 major credit cards with combined limits exceeding $30,000, and an auto loan for $25,000, all within the past 8 months. Each application had been supported by employment verification calls to Pinnacle Financial Services, utility bills with my address, and other documentation that suggested an intimate knowledge of my personal and professional life. Margaret's explanation of how credit fraud typically worked made the violation feel even more personal and disturbing. She described how identity thieves usually operated with limited information, applying for small amounts of credit and hoping to avoid detection for as long as possible. The fraud against me, however, demonstrated a level of planning and inside knowledge that suggested someone very close to me had orchestrated the entire scheme. The perpetrator knew not only my basic identifying information, but also my employment history, my banking relationships, my address history, and even details about my financial goals and investment timeline that would have been necessary to answer verification questions during the application process. The immediate practical implications of the discovery were overwhelming enough, but the emotional impact of realizing that someone I trusted had systematically violated my privacy and security was devastating in ways I couldn't have anticipated. My first instinct was to assume that the fraud had been committed by some sophisticated criminal organization that had somehow obtained my information through a data breach or other external source. The possibility that someone in my personal life was responsible seemed impossible to accept, despite Margaret's gentle suggestion that the level of detail in the fraudulent applications typically indicated involvement by a family member or close friend. Margaret walked me through the immediate steps necessary to protect my credit and begin the fraud dispute process, but her explanations felt distant and surreal as I struggled to process the magnitude of what had happened. I would need to file police reports, contact each creditor individually, submit fraud affidavits, and begin the lengthy process of proving that I had not authorized any of the fraudulent accounts. The timeline for resolving identity theft cases could extend for months or even years, during which my credit would remain damaged, and my ability to make major financial decisions would be severely compromised. The drive back to my office that afternoon was a blur of competing emotions and racing thoughts, as I tried to comprehend how my carefully constructed financial life had been undermined so completely without my knowledge. I had built my career on understanding and preventing exactly this type of fraud, yet I had been completely blind to its occurrence in my own life. The professional embarrassment was significant, but it paled in comparison to the growing realization that someone I cared about had been systematically deceiving me while I believed we were building a stronger relationship. The rest of that week passed in a haze of phone calls to credit bureaus, banks, and law enforcement agencies, as I began the process of documenting the fraud and protecting my remaining accounts. Each conversation required me to recount the details of the violation, explaining over and over how someone had used my identity to obtain credit without my knowledge or consent. The repetition of these explanations made the reality of the situation sink in more deeply, forcing me to confront the fact that my sense of security and control over my financial life had been completely illusory. The investigation into the source of the fraud began immediately, led by Detective Sarah Williams from the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. Detective Williams was a veteran investigator with over 15 years of experience in identity theft cases, and her matter-of-fact approach to the evidence provided some comfort during an otherwise overwhelming process. She explained that cases involving this level of detailed personal information almost always pointed to someone within the victim's immediate circle, typically a family member, romantic partner, or close friend, who had ongoing access to personal documents and financial information. Detective Williams requested detailed information about everyone who had access to my apartment, my workplace, and my personal documents, creating a list of potential suspects that felt like a betrayal in itself. The process of identifying people who could have obtained my social security number, employment information, and other sensitive data forced me to acknowledge how much personal information I had shared with family members and close friends over the years. The investigation would require examining the financial records and activities of people I loved and trusted, turning my closest relationships into potential crime scenes. The evidence-gathering process revealed disturbing details about the sophistication and planning that had gone into the fraud scheme. The perpetrator had not only obtained my personal information, but had also researched the application processes for multiple financial institutions, understanding exactly what documentation and verification procedures would be required. Phone records showed that employment verification calls had been made to Pinnacle Financial Services, during times when the caller would have known I was in meetings or otherwise unavailable to potentially overhear the conversations. Even more unsettling was the discovery that several of the fraudulent applications had been submitted from IP addresses associated with locations I frequented, including the public library, near my parents' house, and a coffee shop, where I often met family members for casual conversations. The technical evidence suggested that whoever was responsible had been carefully timing their activities around my schedule, using my known routines and commitments to minimize the risk of detection. This level of planning indicated that the fraud was not an impulsive decision, but rather a calculated scheme that had been developing over an extended period. The psychological impact of living under investigation was unexpectedly difficult, creating a sense of paranoia and suspicion that colored every interaction with family and friends. Conversations that had previously felt natural and comfortable became opportunities to analyze what information I might have inadvertently shared, or what personal details might have been observed and recorded for later use. The trust that forms the Foundation of close relationships began to erode as I found myself questioning the motives behind seemingly innocent questions about my work schedule, my financial goals, or my daily routines. Meanwhile, the practical consequences of the identity theft began to manifest in ways that affected every aspect of my daily life. My credit score, which had been a source of pride and financial advantage, plummeted as the fraudulent accounts were reported to credit bureaus. Loan applications I submitted for a new car were denied, and my insurance rates increased due to the negative changes in my credit profile. The financial security I had worked so hard to build was crumbling, not because of any poor decisions I had made, but because someone else had weaponized my good credit and responsible financial history against me. The investigation process also revealed the full extent of the financial damage that had been inflicted through the fraud scheme. Beyond the obvious loans and credit cards, the perpetrator had also attempted to access my existing investment accounts, had applied for additional credit products that were denied due to debt-to-income ratios, and had even inquired about refinancing my mortgage without my knowledge. The pattern suggested that the fraud would have continued escalating if it had not been discovered, potentially destroying my financial life completely over time. Detective Williams explained that identity theft cases often involved ongoing criminal activity rather than one-time incidents, meaning that the perpetrator was likely planning additional fraudulent activities that had not yet been implemented. This possibility required constant vigilance and monitoring of my credit reports, bank statements, and other financial accounts to watch for new signs of unauthorized activity. The sense of security that comes from routine financial management was replaced by constant anxiety about what new violations might be discovered. As the investigation progressed through its second week, the evidence began pointing more clearly towards someone within my immediate family circle. The employment verification calls had been made by someone who knew my work schedule intimately, understanding exactly when I would be unavailable to potentially overhear phone conversations. The application addresses included not only my current residence, but also previous addresses that would only be known by someone familiar with my housing history over several years. Most damning was the discovery that several applications had been submitted using email addresses that incorporated personal details and nicknames that only close family members would know. The growing evidence against a family member created an emotional conflict that was almost as devastating as the financial fraud itself. I found myself hoping that the investigation would reveal some external perpetrator, even though the evidence clearly pointed towards someone I loved and trusted. The possibility that a family member had systematically violated my privacy and security while maintaining a facade of caring and support was more painful than the monetary losses or credit damage. It represented a betrayal of fundamental assumptions about family loyalty and protection that had shaped my understanding of relationships since childhood. Detective Williams prepared me for the likelihood that the investigation would ultimately focus on family members, explaining that identity theft by relatives was unfortunately common and often involved exactly the type of detailed planning and inside knowledge that characterized my case. She described how family-based identity theft cases were particularly damaging because they involved ongoing deception and emotional manipulation in addition to financial crimes. The perpetrators often justified their actions by claiming family need or emergency situations, making victims feel guilty for pursuing criminal charges against relatives. The second major revelation came when Detective Williams discovered that the fraudulent auto loan had been used to purchase a luxury SUV that was currently registered and insured under my name but was being driven by someone else. The vehicle identification number and registration records led to an address that I recognized immediately, creating the first direct link between the financial fraud and a specific family member. The discovery that not only had my credit been used fraudulently, but that the proceeds were being enjoyed openly while I remained unaware of the crime, added a layer of boldness and callousness to the betrayal that was difficult to comprehend. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore, pointing clearly toward Amanda as the perpetrator of the identity theft scheme. The timing of the fraudulent applications coincided perfectly with the period when she had been asking detailed questions about my financial management and expressing interest in improving her own credit situation. The personal information required for the applications matched exactly the details I had shared during our conversations about budgeting and financial planning, conversations I had interpreted as evidence of her personal growth and maturity. The realization that Amanda had been systematically deceiving me while I believed we were building a closer relationship was devastating in ways that went far beyond the financial damage. Every conversation we had shared during the previous months now appeared in a different light, revealing how thoroughly she had manipulated my desire to help and mentor her into an opportunity to gather information for criminal purposes. The sister who had expressed admiration for my financial success and gratitude for my advice had actually been studying my habits and routines to better impersonate me during credit applications. Even more painful was the recognition that Amanda had involved Rachel in the deception, using her daughter's presence during family visits to create an atmosphere of trust and normalcy while she observed my personal documents and financial records. The innocent family bonding that I had treasured as evidence of our improving relationship had actually been elaborate reconnaissance missions designed to gather intelligence for identity theft. The violation of trust extended beyond the financial crimes to encompass every aspect of our renewed relationship, revealing that nothing about Amanda's apparent transformation had been genuine. The confrontation I had been dreading became inevitable as the evidence mounted and Detective Williams prepared to make an arrest. The decision to proceed with criminal charges against a family member was agonizing, but the scope and sophistication of the fraud made it clear that this was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a simple mistake that could be resolved through family discussion. Amanda had committed serious felony crimes over an extended period, demonstrating a level of premeditation and callousness that required legal consequences rather than family forgiveness. The night before Detective Williams planned to approach Amanda with the evidence, I called my parents to explain what the investigation had revealed and to prepare them for the criminal charges that would soon follow. The conversation was one of the most difficult of my life, requiring me to destroy their image of Amanda's recent positive changes while explaining how their younger daughter had systematically victimized their older daughter through an elaborate fraud scheme. Their initial disbelief and attempts to find alternative explanations gradually gave way to acceptance as I shared the overwhelming evidence that Detective Williams had compiled. My father's response was characteristic of his conflict-avoidant personality, expressing shock and disappointment while immediately beginning to strategize about how the family could minimize the consequences and move forward. My mother's reaction was more emotionally complex, involving grief for the loss of her hopes about Amanda's transformation as well as guilt about her role in enabling the behaviors that had led to this criminal activity. Both parents seemed genuinely surprised by the extent of the fraud, suggesting that Amanda had been deceiving them as thoroughly as she had been deceiving me. The family meeting that followed was surreal and heartbreaking, bringing together parents who were struggling to accept their daughter's criminal behavior with another daughter who was trying to balance her need for justice with her desire to preserve family relationships. We discussed practical matters like legal representation for Amanda and the impact of criminal charges on Rachel's custody situation, but underlying every practical conversation was the devastating realization that our family would never be the same. The trust that had been slowly rebuilding between Amanda and me was completely destroyed, and even the relationships between other family members were damaged by the knowledge of what had occurred. The arrest itself took place at my parents' house on a quiet Thursday morning, with Detective Williams and two other officers arriving to execute the warrant while Amanda was visiting with Rachel. I had chosen not to be present for the arrest, unable to bear watching my sister taken into custody despite my anger about her crimes. My parents later described the scene as devastating, with Amanda initially denying the charges before breaking down when confronted with the overwhelming evidence of her guilt. Rachel's presence during the arrest added another layer of tragedy to an already heartbreaking situation, as the 8-year-old witnessed her mother's arrest without understanding the complex circumstances that had led to that moment. Amanda's first reaction to the criminal charges was consistent with the pattern of deflection and blame shifting that had characterized her response to problems throughout her life. Rather than accepting responsibility for the identity theft and acknowledging the harm she had caused, she immediately began crafting a narrative that portrayed herself as the victim of circumstances and family dysfunction. Her initial statements to police and family members suggested that she had been driven to desperate measures by financial pressures and lack of family support, implying that her crimes were somehow justified by her difficult situation as a single mother. The justification narrative that Amanda constructed revealed the depth of her sense of entitlement and her inability to accept accountability for her actions. In her version of events, the identity theft was not a serious crime but rather an informal family loan that she had always intended to repay once her financial situation improved. She claimed that she had assumed I would be willing to help her if she had asked directly, so using my credit without permission was simply a more efficient way of accessing support that she believed I would have provided anyway. This twisted logic demonstrated how thoroughly Amanda had rationalized her criminal behavior, convincing herself that she was entitled to use my financial resources because of our family relationship. Even more disturbing was Amanda's attempt to shift blame onto me for creating the opportunity for identity theft by sharing too much personal information during our conversations about financial planning. She argued that my willingness to discuss banking procedures and credit management had essentially invited her to use that information, suggesting that I bore some responsibility for my own victimization. This victim-blaming strategy was particularly painful because it attacked the very generosity and desire to help that Amanda had exploited to commit her crimes in the first place. The legal proceedings that followed Amanda's arrest revealed additional details about the scope and impact of her fraud scheme that made the betrayal even more devastating. Court documents showed that she had not only used my identity to obtain credit but had also attempted to use my employment information to secure an apartment lease and had even applied for government benefits using my social security number. The pattern suggested that Amanda viewed my identity as a resource available for her use whenever her own financial situation became difficult, rather than understanding that identity theft was a serious crime with real consequences for the victim. The pre-sentence investigation conducted by the probation department provided insight into Amanda's financial situation and decision-making process that helped explain how she had justified such extensive criminal activity. Despite receiving regular financial support from our parents and occasional assistance from me, Amanda had accumulated significant debt through impulsive spending and poor financial decisions. Rather than addressing these problems through budgeting, increased income, or lifestyle changes, she had chosen to solve her financial difficulties by stealing my identity and using my excellent credit to access funds that she could never have obtained legitimately. The probation report also revealed that Amanda had been researching identity theft techniques online and had even consulted with other individuals who had experience with credit fraud, suggesting that her crimes were not impulsive decisions but rather carefully planned criminal activities. This premeditation made her betrayal even more devastating, as it demonstrated that she had deliberately chosen to victimize me, rather than finding legitimate solutions to her financial problems. The systematic nature of her research and planning showed that she understood exactly what she was doing and the potential consequences for both herself and me. The courtroom proceedings stretched across 3 months of preliminary hearings, plea negotiations, and sentencing discussions that turned our family's private tragedy into a matter of public record. Each appearance required me to sit in sterile government buildings while lawyers debated the monetary value of Amanda's betrayal and judges calculated appropriate punishment for crimes that had devastated my financial life and emotional well-being. The formal language of legal proceedings seemed inadequate to capture the personal destruction that identity theft had wrought, reducing years of systematic deception to case numbers and sentencing guidelines that felt disconnected from the actual human cost of Amanda's actions. The victim impact statement I prepared for Amanda's sentencing hearing became an exercise in articulating pain that had no adequate vocabulary. How could I explain to a judge who had never experienced identity theft by a family member what it felt like to discover that someone you loved had spent months studying your habits and vulnerabilities to better exploit them? The financial losses were quantifiable and could be presented in neat charts and spreadsheets, but the emotional damage defied measurement or easy explanation. I struggled to convey how Amanda's crimes had not only stolen my money and damaged my credit but had also destroyed my ability to trust my own judgment about the people closest to me. Writing about the impact of Amanda's betrayal forced me to confront aspects of the victimization that I had been avoiding in my focus on the practical tasks of credit repair and legal proceedings. The identity theft had not simply taken money from me, it had fundamentally altered my relationship with financial security and personal privacy in ways that would affect every future decision. I now approached routine financial activities with constant vigilance, checking my credit reports obsessively and monitoring every account for signs of unauthorized activity. The ease and confidence I had once felt in managing my financial life had been replaced by persistent anxiety about vulnerabilities I might not be detecting. Even more devastating was the realization that Amanda's crimes had poisoned my relationships with other family members who had not been directly involved in the fraud, but who were now forced to navigate the complicated dynamics of loving both the victim and the perpetrator. My parents were struggling with their own guilt about enabling Amanda's financial irresponsibility over the years while also trying to support her through the criminal justice process. Their divided loyalties created additional stress in family relationships that were already strained by the legal proceedings and the practical challenges of dealing with Amanda's incarceration and Rachel's care. The custody arrangements for Rachel became another source of family conflict that extended the emotional damage far beyond the original identity theft. Amanda's arrest and subsequent conviction meant that Rachel needed alternative living arrangements, and the discussion about her placement revealed long-standing family dynamics that had contributed to the environment where Amanda's criminal behavior could develop. My parents immediately volunteered to take custody of Rachel, but their track record of enabling Amanda's poor decisions raised questions about whether they could provide the structure and accountability that an 8-year-old needed during such a traumatic period. My own relationship with Rachel became complicated by my role as the victim of her mother's crimes, creating an impossible situation where I wanted to support my niece while also maintaining appropriate boundaries around my own recovery process. Rachel was old enough to understand that her mother had done something wrong, but young enough to be confused about why the family was no longer gathering for Sunday dinners or holiday celebrations. Explaining the situation to a child required finding language that acknowledged the seriousness of Amanda's actions without completely destroying Rachel's relationship with her mother or her sense of family stability. The practical challenges of credit repair and financial recovery proved to be almost as exhausting as the emotional work of processing the betrayal. Each fraudulent account required separate dispute processes with different creditors, involving endless phone calls, certified letters, and documentation of my innocence in activities that bore my name and personal information. The burden of proof in identity theft cases essentially required me to prove a negative, demonstrating that I had not authorized transactions and applications that appeared legitimate based on the accurate personal information Amanda had used. The timeline for resolving identity theft disputes stretched much longer than I had anticipated, with some creditors requiring multiple rounds of documentation and verification before agreeing to remove fraudulent accounts from my credit reports. During this extended period, my credit remained damaged, affecting my ability to make normal financial decisions like refinancing my mortgage or obtaining favorable interest rates on necessary purchases. The ongoing consequences of Amanda's crimes continued to impact my daily life months after her arrest, serving as constant reminders of the violation and preventing me from moving forward with my financial plans. Perhaps most frustrating was the discovery that some creditors were reluctant to write off the fraudulent debt, instead, pursuing collection activities that treated me as responsible for Amanda's spending despite the criminal conviction and court orders establishing her guilt. The legal system's recognition of my victimhood did not automatically translate into cooperation from private companies whose primary concern was recovering their losses rather than acknowledging the human cost of identity theft. I found myself fighting battles on multiple fronts, dealing simultaneously with law enforcement, credit bureaus, individual creditors, and family dynamics while trying to maintain my professional responsibilities and emotional stability. The stress of managing these competing demands began affecting my performance at Pinnacle Financial Services, creating professional consequences that added another layer of damage to Amanda's crimes. My expertise in fraud detection, which had once been a source of pride and career advancement, became a source of embarrassment as colleagues learned about my personal victimization. The irony of being a fraud specialist who had been defrauded by her own sister was not lost on anyone, and I found myself questioning my professional competence despite the fact that family-based identity theft was notoriously difficult to detect and prevent. My supervisor, Michael Rodriguez, was understanding about the time I needed for legal proceedings and credit repair activities, but the extended disruption to my work schedule and emotional availability inevitably affected my productivity and career trajectory. Projects that I would normally have completed efficiently required extra time and attention as I struggled to maintain focus while dealing with the ongoing consequences of Amanda's crimes. The professional identity I had built over years of dedicated work was being undermined by circumstances completely beyond my control, adding professional anxiety to the personal trauma I was already experiencing. The social isolation that followed Amanda's arrest and the public nature of her crimes created additional challenges that I had not anticipated when deciding to pursue criminal charges. Our extended family and community knew about the identity theft through local news coverage and court records, making every social interaction potentially awkward as people struggled to respond appropriately to such an unusual family crisis. Some friends and relatives expressed support and outrage on my behalf, while others seemed uncomfortable with the criminal charges and suggested that family problems should be resolved privately rather than through the legal system. The judgment and second-guessing from people who had not experienced identity theft by a family member added another dimension of pain to an already overwhelming situation. Comments about how family members should forgive each other or suggestions that I was being too harsh in pursuing criminal charges revealed how poorly most people understood the long-term consequences of identity theft and the systematic nature of Amanda's deception. The assumption that family relationships should override concerns about criminal behavior ignored the practical reality that identity theft creates ongoing financial vulnerabilities that require legal resolution rather than just personal forgiveness. The holiday season following Amanda's conviction was particularly difficult, as traditional family celebrations had to be completely reimagined around the absence of someone who had been central to our family gatherings despite her problematic behavior. Christmas dinner at my parents' house felt hollow and forced, with Rachel asking difficult questions about why her mother was not present and when she would be coming home. The conversation at family meals was stilted and careful, avoiding topics that might remind everyone of Amanda's crimes while also avoiding any discussion of future plans that might be affected by her incarceration. The financial counseling sessions that Detective Williams had recommended as part of my recovery process provided practical guidance for protecting my identity in the future, but also highlighted how fundamentally Amanda's crimes had changed my relationship with money and financial planning. Strategies that most people could implement casually, like sharing financial information with family members or using convenient online banking features, now required careful risk assessment and security protocols that felt excessive but necessary given my experience with family-based fraud. The counselor Dr. Patricia Reeves specialized in helping identity theft victims rebuild their sense of security and control over their financial lives. Her approach combined practical education about fraud prevention with therapeutic techniques for processing the emotional trauma of financial victimization. Working with Dr. Reeves helped me understand that the hypervigilance and anxiety I was experiencing were normal responses to identity theft, and that rebuilding trust in financial institutions and systems would require time and intentional effort rather than simply resolving the fraudulent accounts. One of the most valuable insights from counseling was the recognition that Amanda's identity theft had exploited my fundamental beliefs about family loyalty and mutual support, using my desire to help against me in ways that went far beyond the specific financial crimes. The rebuilding process would require not only protecting my financial information but also developing new frameworks for family relationships that acknowledged the reality of what had happened while still allowing for appropriate connections with family members who had not betrayed my trust. The decision to relocate to Denver emerged gradually as I realized that staying in Phoenix meant constant exposure to reminders of Amanda's crimes and ongoing involvement in family dynamics that were preventing my recovery. Every drive past the bank where she had applied for fraudulent loans, or the mall where she had spent money stolen through my identity triggered fresh waves of anger and sadness that interfered with my ability to move forward. The familiar places that had once represented home and family now felt contaminated by associations with betrayal and violation. The job opportunity that ultimately facilitated my relocation came through a professional contact who had learned about my situation and recognized that a geographic fresh start might be beneficial for both personal and career reasons. CyberShield Solutions, a cybersecurity firm based in Denver, was expanding their fraud prevention division and needed someone with my background in financial crimes detection. The position offered not only an escape from the painful associations of Phoenix, but also a chance to channel my experience with identity theft into work that might help other victims avoid similar devastation. The months of preparation for relocating to Denver provided a welcome focus on future possibilities rather than past trauma, allowing me to envision a life where Amanda's crimes were part of my history rather than my daily reality. The practical tasks of job searching, apartment hunting, and coordinating the logistics of a cross-state move created positive momentum that contrasted sharply with the reactive stance I had been forced to take during the legal proceedings and credit repair process. For the first time since discovering the identity theft, I was making proactive choices about my future rather than simply responding to crises created by Amanda's actions. The conversations with my parents about my decision to move were painful but necessary, forcing all of us to acknowledge that the family dynamics that had enabled Amanda's criminal behavior were not healthy for anyone involved. My parents initially interpreted my relocation as abandonment or punishment, suggesting that I was overreacting to Amanda's mistakes and that family loyalty should motivate me to stay close during this difficult time. Their response revealed how deeply they misunderstood both the severity of identity theft as a crime and the ongoing impact it was having on my emotional and financial well-being. The process of explaining why I needed distance from family members who had not committed any crimes was complicated and emotionally exhausting, requiring me to articulate boundaries that felt necessary for my recovery but that might appear harsh or unforgiving to people who had not experienced similar
Betrayal.
My parents' difficulty accepting my decision reflected their own struggle to balance their love for both daughters with the practical reality that Amanda's actions had created fundamental changes in family relationships that could not be resolved through goodwill or traditional family reconciliation approaches. The final weeks in Phoenix were bittersweet, involving the closure of professional relationships and friendships that had been important to my life before Amanda's crimes changed everything. Colleagues at Pinnacle Financial Services organized a farewell gathering that felt premature, as I was leaving not because of career advancement or personal choice but because staying had become incompatible with my emotional recovery. The sense of being driven away from a life I had worked hard to build added another layer of loss to an already devastating experience. The last family dinner before my departure was awkward and emotional, with everyone struggling to find appropriate ways to acknowledge the significance of my leaving while avoiding direct discussion of the circumstances that had made relocation necessary. Rachel's confusion about why her aunt was moving away when her mother was already absent created additional emotional complexity, as I tried to explain my decision in terms that an 8-year-old could understand without burdening her with adult concerns about criminal behavior and family dysfunction. The actual departure from Phoenix felt simultaneously like escape and abandonment, relief and grief combined in ways that reflected the complicated emotions surrounding my entire experience with Amanda's identity theft. Driving away from the city where I had built my career and established my adult identity, I was leaving behind not only the painful memories of betrayal but also the life I had worked so hard to create before discovering that my own sister viewed my success as a resource available for her exploitation. The drive to Denver took 2 days, providing time for reflection on everything that had happened and everything that would need to change in order for me to rebuild a sense of security and trust in my relationships. The landscape gradually shifted from desert to mountains, offering a visual metaphor for the transition I was hoping to make from the barren emotional territory of betrayal and legal proceedings to something more hopeful and life-giving. The physical distance from Phoenix represented the psychological space I needed to process Amanda's crimes without constant reminders and family pressure to minimize or forgive what had happened. Arriving in Denver on a crisp October morning, I felt something approaching optimism for the first time in months. The city was completely unfamiliar, free from associations with Amanda or family dynamics or any of the painful experiences that had characterized the previous year. The apartment I had rented sight unseen turned out to be perfect for a fresh start, with large windows and mountain views that suggested possibilities for growth and healing that had felt impossible while surrounded by reminders of betrayal. The first few weeks in Denver were challenging in practical ways but emotionally restorative, as I focused on establishing new routine and building a life that was completely separate from the family dynamics that had enabled Amanda's criminal behavior. The job at CyberShield Solutions provided immediate purpose and intellectual stimulation, allowing me to channel my experience with identity theft into work that felt meaningful and redemptive. My colleagues knew about my background through the hiring process but treated my expertise as an asset rather than a source of embarrassment or professional liability. The gradual process of making Denver feel like home involved deliberate choices about which aspects of my previous life to maintain and which to leave behind in Phoenix. I established new banking relationships with institutions that had no connection to the fraudulent accounts Amanda had opened, created new email addresses and online accounts with enhanced security protocols, and even adopted new personal habits around financial management that prioritized protection over convenience. These changes represented practical adaptations to the reality of identity theft, but they also symbolized my commitment to rebuilding my life on terms that prioritized my security and well-being over family harmony or social expectations. The coffee shop in Capitol Hill had become my sanctuary during the 18 months since arriving in Denver, a place where I could work on my laptop while watching the city come alive through floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Mountain View Cafe had the perfect combination of reliable Wi-Fi, excellent coffee, and enough ambient noise to mask phone calls with clients and colleagues. It was here on a snowy February morning that I first noticed David Chen sitting at the corner table with his own laptop and what appeared to be several cybersecurity textbooks spread across the worn wooden surface. Our initial conversation began when he politely asked if I could watch his belongings while he stepped outside to take a phone call, a simple request that led to a discussion about our respective work when he returned. David was a cybersecurity consultant specializing in financial institutions, and his understanding of fraud prevention and digital security created an immediate connection that felt both professional and personal. Unlike the careful conversations I had grown accustomed to since Amanda's crimes, talking with David about cybersecurity felt natural and unguarded, perhaps because his expertise made my own experience with identity theft seem like valuable insight rather than personal failure. The attraction between us developed slowly and organically over several weeks of chance encounters at the coffee shop, gradually evolving from professional discussions to personal conversations about our backgrounds and interests. David had moved to Denver from Seattle after completing his master's degree in cybersecurity, drawn by the city's growing tech industry and outdoor recreation opportunities. His approach to relationships was refreshingly direct and honest, qualities that I had learned to value deeply after experiencing Amanda's systematic deception and manipulation. When David eventually asked me to dinner, I found myself genuinely excited about the prospect of romance for the first time since discovering Amanda's identity theft. The months of therapy with Dr. Reeves had helped me understand that my ability to trust and form intimate connections had been damaged by Amanda's betrayal, but working with David on several cybersecurity projects had demonstrated that it was possible to build professional relationships based on mutual respect and transparency. The transition from professional collaboration to personal interest felt organic rather than forced, suggesting that my capacity for healthy relationships was gradually healing. Our first dinner date at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Denver established patterns of communication and mutual interest that would characterize our entire relationship. David was curious about my background in fraud detection without being invasive about the personal experiences that had shaped my expertise. He shared stories about his own family and career journey, without overwhelming me with information or creating pressure for reciprocal disclosure before I was ready. The conversation flowed naturally between work topics and personal interests, creating a foundation of intellectual compatibility that complemented our obvious physical attraction. The decision to share details about Amanda's identity theft came several months into our relationship, when David and I had begun discussing our respective family backgrounds and the experiences that had influenced our career choices. I had been dreading this conversation, uncertain how to explain the circumstances that had brought me to Denver without revealing the depth of family dysfunction and criminal behavior that characterized my recent history. David's response to my disclosure was exactly what I needed to hear, focusing on my resilience and strength rather than expressing pity or discomfort about the family dynamics I described. David's professional background in cybersecurity provided him with a comprehensive understanding of identity theft that extended beyond the technical aspects to include the psychological and emotional impact on victims. He validated my ongoing vigilance about financial security without making me feel paranoid or damaged, instead suggesting additional protection strategies that could provide peace of mind without being burdensome. His matter-of-fact approach to discussing fraud prevention made my heightened security awareness feel like reasonable caution rather than trauma-driven anxiety. The relationship progressed naturally through shared interests in hiking, technology, and financial planning, creating a partnership based on compatibility rather than need or desperation. David appreciated my methodical approach to life decisions and financial management, viewing my caution as wisdom gained through experience rather than neurosis resulting from family trauma. We complemented each other professionally as well, with my expertise in fraud detection and his background in cybersecurity creating opportunities for collaboration on consulting projects that benefited both our careers. The first indication that my past was about to intrude on my carefully constructed new life came through an unexpected phone call from Detective Williams, who had maintained periodic contact to update me on Amanda's case and its resolution. Amanda had been released from prison after serving 14 months of a 3-year sentence, with the remainder to be served on probation under strict financial monitoring conditions. Detective Williams was calling to inform me of Amanda's release, and to discuss additional security measures that might be advisable given her history of targeting family members for financial crimes. The news of Amanda's release triggered a resurgence of anxiety and hypervigilance that I had not experienced since the early months after her arrest. Despite the therapy and healing work I had done in Denver, the knowledge that Amanda was once again free to access personal information and financial institutions reactivated fears about my security and privacy that had been dormant for months. David was supportive and understanding about my increased security concerns, helping me implement additional protection measures without making me feel paranoid or unreasonable. Detective Williams explained that Amanda's probation conditions included restrictions on her access to financial institutions and requirements for regular reporting about her employment and residence. However, these legal constraints were primarily designed to prevent her from committing new crimes rather than to protect previous victims from ongoing harassment or contact attempts. The responsibility for maintaining appropriate boundaries would largely fall to me, requiring continued vigilance about my personal information and family relationships. The call from Detective Williams also included information about Amanda's current circumstances that painted a picture of someone whose life had been fundamentally altered by the consequences of her criminal behavior. She was living in a supervised halfway house in Phoenix, working in a retail position that required background checks and financial monitoring, and struggling to rebuild any kind of relationship with Rachel, who had been thriving in the stable environment provided by my parents' custody. The criminal conviction had effectively destroyed Amanda's ability to obtain credit, secure decent housing, or access many employment opportunities, creating a cycle of financial limitation that was exactly the opposite of what she had been trying to achieve through identity theft. While part of me felt vindicated by the long-term consequences Amanda was experiencing, I also recognized that her ongoing struggles meant she might be even more desperate and likely to attempt new schemes to improve her financial situation. The combination of her demonstrated willingness to victimize family members and her current financial pressures created a volatile situation that required ongoing caution and boundary maintenance. Detective Williams recommended that I continue monitoring my credit reports regularly and maintain minimal contact with family members who might inadvertently provide Amanda with information about my current life and location. The conversation with Detective Williams forced me to confront the reality that Amanda's crimes would continue to affect my life indefinitely, requiring permanent changes to how I managed relationships and personal information, rather than simply a temporary period of recovery and healing. This recognition was discouraging but also empowering, as it helped me understand that the security measures I had implemented were not temporary trauma responses, but rather permanent lifestyle adaptations that would protect me from future victimization by Amanda or others who might attempt similar crimes. David's response to the news about Amanda's release demonstrated the depth of his understanding about cybersecurity threats and his commitment to supporting my safety and peace of mind. He suggested additional technical security measures that could provide early warning about attempted access to my financial accounts, and he offered to help me research Amanda's current activities through public records and social media monitoring. His practical approach to threat assessment helped me distinguish between reasonable precautions and anxiety-driven overreactions, providing a framework for maintaining appropriate vigilance without allowing fear to dominate my daily life. The decision to propose came 18 months after David and I had begun dating, during a hiking trip to Rocky Mountain National Park that had become one of our favorite shared activities. The proposal itself was perfectly suited to our relationship, taking place at a scenic overlook with mountain views that represented the new life I had built in Colorado. David's proposal speech acknowledged both my strength in overcoming Amanda's betrayal and his commitment to building a future based on honesty and mutual support, themes that resonated deeply with my healing process and personal values. Planning our wedding provided an opportunity to create new family traditions that honored my relationship with supportive family members while maintaining appropriate boundaries around those who had enabled Amanda's criminal behavior. My parents were invited to attend the ceremony, but the guest list and celebration were designed around David's family and the friends we had made together in Denver rather than attempting to recreate the family dynamics that had proven so problematic in Phoenix. The wedding planning process reinforced my commitment to building relationships based on choice and compatibility rather than obligation and historical connection. The ceremony itself was small and intimate, held at a mountain venue that symbolized the new perspective and fresh start that David and I were creating together. My parents attended and seemed genuinely happy about my marriage, though their comments revealed ongoing discomfort with my decision to maintain distance from Amanda and limit my involvement in family situations that might create vulnerability to future victimization. Their struggle to understand my boundaries reflected their continued inability to fully grasp the severity of identity theft as a crime and its long-term impact on victims' sense of security and trust. The honeymoon period of our marriage was marked by a sense of security and partnership that I had never previously experienced, built on foundations of honesty and mutual respect that contrasted sharply with the deception and manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Amanda. David and I established joint financial accounts and shared investment goals, but we also maintained individual accounts and security protocols that protected both of us from potential future fraud attempts. Our approach to financial management reflected both trust in our relationship and wisdom gained from my experience with family-based identity theft. The news that Amanda had violated her probation conditions came 2 years after our wedding, delivered through another call from Detective Williams, who had continued to monitor Amanda's case through its conclusion. Amanda had been arrested for attempting to use false identification to open a bank account, suggesting that her release from prison had not resulted in the behavioral changes that probation was intended to encourage. The violation meant that Amanda would likely return to prison to serve the remainder of her original sentence, providing additional protection for potential victims, but also confirming that her criminal behavior was an ongoing pattern rather than a temporary lapse in judgment. Detective Williams explained that Amanda's probation violation had been discovered through routine monitoring rather than victim reports, suggesting that she had not specifically targeted me or other family members for her latest criminal attempt. However, the fact that she had returned to identity-related crimes so quickly after her release indicated that imprisonment had not addressed the underlying attitudes and behaviors that had led to her original offenses. This pattern was unfortunately common among identity thieves, who often viewed fraud as a solution to financial problems rather than understanding it as serious criminal behavior with lasting consequences. The information about Amanda's probation violation brought a complex mixture of relief and sadness, as it confirmed both that my ongoing security measures were necessary and that Amanda was unlikely to develop the accountability and empathy that would be required for any kind of family reconciliation. David and I discussed the implications of Amanda's continued criminal behavior for our own security planning and family relationships, ultimately deciding to maintain the protective measures we had already implemented while continuing to build our life together without constant preoccupation with Amanda's activities. The final resolution came in the form of a restitution payment that arrived 3 years after Amanda's initial conviction, representing partial compensation for the financial losses I had experienced through her identity theft. The amount was significantly less than the total damage Amanda had caused, but the symbolic value of receiving some acknowledgement of her debt was meaningful beyond the monetary compensation. The payment came with documentation showing that Amanda had been required to participate in financial counseling and victim impact education as part of her sentence, suggesting that the legal system had at least attempted to address the underlying issues that had contributed to her criminal behavior. The restitution payment coincided with a career milestone that felt like the completion of my recovery journey, as I was promoted to senior consultant at CyberShield Solutions and offered the opportunity to lead a new division focused on family-based financial fraud prevention. The position would allow me to use my personal experience with identity theft to help other victims and to develop education programs that might prevent similar crimes from occurring. The transformation of my victimization into professional expertise and advocacy work felt like the ultimate triumph over Amanda's attempt to destroy my financial life and personal security. David's support throughout this career transition demonstrated the strength of our partnership and his understanding of how important it was for me to find meaning and purpose in my experience with identity theft. He encouraged me to pursue speaking opportunities and consulting work that would raise awareness about family-based financial fraud, even when these activities required me to share personal details about Amanda's crimes with professional audiences. His belief in the value of my story and expertise gave me confidence to transform my experience from a source of shame and vulnerability into a platform for helping others avoid similar victimization. The letter from Rachel arrived on my birthday, 5 years after Amanda's original arrest, providing an unexpected connection to family relationships that had been severed by Amanda's criminal behavior. Rachel, now 13 years old, had written to express her understanding about why I had moved away from Phoenix and her appreciation for the stability that my parents had provided during her mother's incarceration. Her letter demonstrated a maturity and insight that suggested she had not been permanently damaged by Amanda's crimes and the family disruption that had followed, offering hope that the next generation might develop healthier patterns of relationship and accountability. Rachel's letter also included questions about my life in Denver and my work in cybersecurity, suggesting genuine interest in maintaining some kind of relationship despite the complicated circumstances surrounding her mother's behavior. David and I discussed how to respond appropriately to Rachel's outreach, ultimately deciding to maintain limited but supportive contact that acknowledged our family connection while respecting the boundaries necessary for my continued security and emotional well-being. The possibility of having some kind of relationship with Rachel felt like an unexpected gift, allowing for family connection without the toxicity that had characterized interactions with Amanda. The final confrontation with Amanda came not through any planned meeting or family intervention, but through a chance encounter at the Denver airport when I was returning from a business trip, and she was apparently traveling through Colorado on her way to some unknown destination. The shock of seeing her in person for the first time since her arrest was overwhelming, triggering immediate physical reactions of anxiety and anger that I had not experienced in years. However, the encounter also provided an opportunity to assess how much healing had occurred and how effectively I had rebuilt my sense of security and identity separate from the trauma of her crimes. Amanda's appearance had changed dramatically during the years since her arrest, reflecting the toll that criminal conviction and incarceration had taken on her life and prospects. She looked older and worn down in ways that went beyond normal aging, carrying herself with a defeated posture that contrasted sharply with the confident charm she had once used to manipulate family members and financial institutions. When she approached me hesitantly at the airport gate, her obvious nervousness and uncertainty revealed that she understood the magnitude of what she had done and its lasting impact on our relationship. The conversation that followed was brief and awkward, with Amanda attempting to apologize for her crimes while also trying to minimize their significance and impact. Her apology felt rehearsed and incomplete, focusing more on her own suffering and consequences than on the damage she had caused to my financial life and emotional well-being. She mentioned financial counseling and therapy programs she had completed in prison, suggesting that she had gained some insight into her behavior, but her continued focus on her own victimization by the criminal justice system revealed that her fundamental attitudes about accountability and responsibility remained unchanged. My response to Amanda's attempted apology was calm and measured, reflecting the emotional work I had done to process her betrayal and the security I had built in my life with David. I acknowledged her words without accepting them as adequate restitution for her crimes, and I clearly stated that her criminal behavior had permanently altered our relationship in ways that could not be repaired through apologies or good intentions. The conversation provided closure in the sense that it confirmed my decision to maintain boundaries and distance from someone who had proven herself capable of such systematic deception and betrayal. The encounter with Amanda also served as a powerful reminder of how much my life had improved since leaving Phoenix and the toxic family dynamics that had enabled her criminal behavior. Standing in the Denver airport, confident in my career success and secure in my marriage to David, I felt gratitude for the difficult journey that had led me to this point rather than resentment about the pain Amanda had caused. Her attempt to re-establish some kind of relationship felt like an intrusion from a previous life that I had successfully moved beyond rather than an opportunity for reconciliation or healing. The final words of our conversation came when Amanda asked whether there might be some possibility for rebuilding trust and family relationships in the future, a question that revealed her continued failure to understand the permanent nature of the damage her crimes had caused. I explained that trust was not something that could be rebuilt through time or good intentions after such systematic betrayal, and that my priority would always be protecting the security and stability I had worked so hard to create. The conversation ended with Amanda walking away, disappointed but perhaps finally understanding that some consequences of criminal behavior are permanent and irreversible. Watching Amanda disappear into the airport crowd, I felt a profound sense of completion and peace that had been building gradually over the years since her arrest. The woman who had once seemed so powerful and capable of destroying my life now appeared small and defeated, someone whose criminal choices had ultimately harmed herself more than anyone else. The identity theft that had once seemed like the end of my world had actually been the catalyst for building a better life than I had ever imagined possible, based on authentic relationships and genuine security rather than the illusion of family loyalty and financial stability. The flight back to Denver gave me time to reflect on the entire journey from Amanda's initial crimes through this final encounter, recognizing how each difficult step had contributed to the strength and wisdom I now possessed. The identity theft had forced me to confront weaknesses in my boundaries and decision-making that had made me vulnerable to manipulation, leading to personal growth that extended far beyond financial security. The geographic relocation had introduced me to David and career opportunities that had enriched my life in ways that would never have been possible if I had remained in Phoenix trying to maintain dysfunctional family relationships. Most importantly, the experience had taught me that recovery from betrayal and financial crimes was not just about restoring what had been lost, but about building something entirely new and better. The life I had created in Denver with David was stronger and more fulfilling than anything I had experienced before Amanda's crimes, built on foundations of honesty and mutual respect that could not be shaken by external threats or family manipulation. The identity theft that had once seemed like the ultimate violation had
ultimately become the path to discovering my own resilience and capacity for creating genuine security and happiness. The corporate boardroom at CyberShield Solutions buzzed with anticipation as I prepared to deliver the keynote presentation that would mark the official launch of our family financial fraud prevention initiative. 5 years had passed since that devastating phone call from Margaret Coleman that first revealed Amanda's systematic identity theft, And now I stood before an audience of financial executives, law enforcement officials, and victim advocates, ready to transform my personal nightmare into a comprehensive program that could protect countless families from similar devastation. The irony was not lost on me that the woman who had once been so ashamed of falling victim to fraud despite her professional expertise was now being recognized as a leading authority on preventing exactly these types of crimes. The presentation materials spread across the conference table represented months of research and development, combining statistical analysis of family-based financial fraud with real-world case studies and practical prevention strategies. David had helped me design the technical components of the program, creating sophisticated monitoring systems that could detect the early warning signs of identity theft while maintaining user privacy and convenience. Our collaboration on this project had deepened our professional partnership while also providing a meaningful outlet for channeling my experience with Amanda's crimes into work that could benefit others facing similar situations. The audience that filled the boardroom included representatives from major banks, credit unions, law enforcement agencies, and victim advocacy organizations, all united by their recognition that family-based financial fraud represented a growing threat that required innovative prevention strategies. My reputation in the cybersecurity industry had grown substantially since joining CyberShield Solutions, but this presentation represented the culmination of everything I had learned about fraud detection, victim recovery, and the unique challenges posed by crimes committed by trusted family members. The stakes felt enormous, not just for my career but for the potential impact on thousands of families who might benefit from better protection and education. Beginning the presentation with my own story required a level of vulnerability that still felt challenging despite years of therapy and healing. Standing before this professional audience, I recounted the discovery of Amanda's crimes and the systematic way she had exploited our family relationship to gather the personal information necessary for her fraud scheme. The room was completely silent as I described the emotional devastation of realizing that someone I loved and trusted had been studying my habits and routines for months, gathering intelligence that would allow her to impersonate me convincingly during credit applications and verification calls. The statistical analysis that followed my personal story painted a sobering picture of family-based financial fraud that extended far beyond individual cases like mine. Research conducted by our team at CyberShield Solutions revealed that identity theft committed by family members accounted for nearly 30% of all reported cases, yet received significantly less attention from financial institutions and law enforcement agencies than stranger-perpetrated fraud. The average financial loss in family-based cases was also substantially higher, both because family members had access to more detailed personal information and because victims often delayed reporting the crimes due to emotional complications around prosecuting relatives. The psychological profile of family-based identity thieves that emerged from our research revealed patterns that were disturbingly familiar to anyone who had experienced Amanda's particular brand of manipulation and entitlement. These perpetrators typically exhibited narcissistic personality traits, viewing family members' financial resources as extensions of their own and showing little genuine empathy for the harm their crimes caused. They were often skilled at emotional manipulation, using family loyalty and guilt to discourage victims from pursuing legal remedies or implementing protective measures that might interfere with future fraud attempts. The prevention strategies I outlined for the audience addressed both the technical and emotional vulnerabilities that family-based identity thieves typically exploited. On the technical side, our program recommended enhanced authentication procedures for high-risk transactions, real-time monitoring systems that could detect unusual patterns of credit applications, and secure document storage solutions that limited family members' access to sensitive financial information. The emotional components focused on education about healthy family boundaries, recognition of manipulation tactics, and support resources for victims who struggled with the conflicting loyalties inherent in crimes committed by relatives. The implementation timeline I presented to the boardroom audience was ambitious but necessary, given the scope of the problem and the potential for prevention to save both financial losses and emotional trauma for countless families. The pilot program would begin with selected financial institutions in 3 metropolitan areas, providing comprehensive training for customer service representatives and fraud detection specialists while also offering educational resources for customers about protecting themselves from family-based identity theft. The success of these pilot programs would determine the feasibility of national expansion and integration with existing fraud prevention systems. The question and answer session that followed my presentation revealed the depth of interest and concern about family-based financial fraud among industry professionals who had previously focused primarily on stranger-perpetrated crimes. Several banking executives shared their own experiences with customers who had been victimized by relatives, describing the unique challenges these cases presented for both investigation and resolution. The emotional complexity of family-based fraud made it difficult for victims to pursue remedies aggressively, while the perpetrators' intimate knowledge of their targets made detection and prevention significantly more challenging than traditional identity theft cases. One particularly insightful question came from a law enforcement representative who asked about the long-term psychological impact on victims and whether traditional fraud recovery programs adequately address the trust issues and relationship damage caused by family-based crimes. My response drew heavily on my own experience with therapy and healing, emphasizing that recovery from family-based identity theft required addressing not only the financial consequences but also the fundamental betrayal of trust that occurred when someone close to you systematically violated your privacy and security for personal gain. The positive reception of my presentation led to immediate interest from several major financial institutions that wanted to implement pilot programs within their existing fraud prevention frameworks. The validation of my work felt deeply meaningful, representing not only professional recognition but also confirmation that Amanda's crimes had ultimately contributed to something positive and protective for other potential victims. The transformation of my personal trauma into professional expertise and advocacy work felt like the ultimate triumph over the devastation Amanda had attempted to inflict on my life. The success of the presentation also opened new opportunities for speaking engagements and consulting work that would allow me to expand the reach and impact of the Family Financial Fraud Prevention Initiative. Over the following months, I traveled to conferences and industry events across the country, sharing my story and expertise with audiences of financial professionals, law enforcement officials, and victim advocates. Each presentation felt like another step away from the victim identity that had defined me immediately after Amanda's arrest and toward a new role as an expert and advocate who could help others avoid similar experiences. The personal satisfaction of this work was amplified by the feedback I received from other victims of family-based financial fraud who attended my presentations or participated in the support groups that became part of our comprehensive program. Their stories revealed the universal themes of betrayal, manipulation, and recovery that transcended the specific details of individual cases, confirming that my experience with Amanda was part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior that could be understood, predicted, and prevented through appropriate education and protective measures. The relationship with David continued to deepen and strengthen throughout this period of professional growth and public recognition, providing a stable foundation of trust and support that contrasted sharply with the deception and exploitation that had characterized my relationship with Amanda. David's expertise in cybersecurity complemented my background in fraud detection perfectly, creating opportunities for collaboration that benefited both our careers while also strengthening our personal bond. His understanding of the technical aspects of identity theft and his respect for the emotional challenges of recovery made him an ideal partner for both my professional work and my ongoing healing process. The decision to start a family came naturally as we established ourselves professionally and personally in Denver, representing another step away from the isolation and defensive positioning that had characterized my life immediately after Amanda's crimes. The pregnancy brought unexpected joy and a sense of future possibilities that had been difficult to imagine during the darkest periods of dealing with identity theft and family betrayal. Planning for our child's arrival provided positive focus and energy that continued the healing process while also creating new motivations for the protective work I was doing professionally. The birth of our daughter Elena marked a profound shift in my perspective on family relationships and the meaning of security and protection. Holding my newborn child, I felt a fierce determination to create for her the kind of stable, trustworthy family environment that I had never experienced consistently during my own childhood. The lessons I had learned about boundaries, accountability, and genuine care would shape how David and I approached parenting, ensuring that Elena would grow up understanding the difference between healthy family support and the toxic dynamics that had enabled Amanda's criminal behavior. The first birthday party we organized for Elena was small and intimate, including David's family, a few close friends from Denver, and my parents who had made the trip from Phoenix to meet their granddaughter. The celebration felt symbolic of the new kind of family traditions we were creating based on choice and mutual respect rather than obligation and historical dysfunction. My parents' presence at the party represented a carefully maintained relationship that acknowledged our family connection while respecting the boundaries necessary to protect my immediate family from potential complications related to Amanda's ongoing issues. The conversation with my parents during their visit revealed that Amanda's life had continued its downward trajectory following her second imprisonment, with additional criminal charges and failed attempts at rehabilitation that confirmed the permanence of her antisocial behavior patterns. Rachel, now 16, had thrived under my parents' custody and was preparing for college with academic achievements and personal stability that suggested she had not been permanently damaged by her mother's criminal behavior and absence. The contrast between Rachel's success and Amanda's continued failure reinforced my belief that individual choices and accountability ultimately determined life outcomes more than family circumstances or external challenges. The news that Amanda had been arrested again, this time for check fraud targeting elderly victims, came through Detective Williams, who had maintained periodic contact despite her retirement from active law enforcement. The charges suggested that Amanda had expanded her criminal activities beyond family members to include vulnerable strangers, demonstrating an escalation in both the scope and callousness of her fraudulent behavior. Detective Williams explained that repeat offenders like Amanda typically showed this pattern of expanding their target selection as their desperation increased and their ability to maintain legitimate employment and relationships deteriorated. The information about Amanda's latest crimes brought a complex mixture of vindication and sadness, confirming that my decision to maintain distance and boundaries had been wise while also highlighting the tragic waste of potential that Amanda's criminal choices represented. The sister who had once been capable of charm and persuasion had devolved into someone who preyed on elderly victims for small amounts of money, destroying her own life and harming innocent people in the process. Her trajectory served as a stark reminder of how criminal behavior patterns tend to escalate rather than improve without genuine accountability and behavioral change. The professional recognition that came with the success of the Family Financial Fraud Prevention Initiative included an invitation to testify before a congressional subcommittee examining identity theft prevention and victim protection policies. The opportunity to influence federal legislation felt like the ultimate validation of my work and a chance to create systemic changes that could protect millions of families from the type of victimization I had experienced. Preparing for congressional testimony required synthesizing years of research, case studies, and policy recommendations into a compelling presentation that could motivate legislative action. The congressional hearing room was intimidating in its formality and historical significance, but the importance of the issues being discussed overrode any personal nervousness about speaking before elected officials and national media. My testimony focused on the unique characteristics of family-based financial fraud and the inadequacy of existing prevention and recovery programs to address crimes committed by trusted relatives. The recommendations I presented included enhanced authentication requirements for high-risk transactions, improved victim support services, and educational programs that could help families recognize and prevent identity theft by relatives. The questions from committee members revealed both genuine interest in addressing family-based financial fraud and the political challenges of creating legislation that could effectively prevent these crimes without imposing excessive burdens on financial institutions or family relationships. Several representatives shared their own experiences with constituents who had been victimized by relatives, confirming that the problem was widespread and bipartisan in its impact. The hearing concluded with commitments to draft legislation incorporating many of my recommendations, representing a significant step toward systemic change that could benefit future victims. The media attention that followed my congressional testimony brought both opportunities and challenges, raising the profile of family-based financial fraud while also requiring careful management of my family's privacy and security. Interview requests came from national news programs, financial publications, and victim advocacy organizations, all seeking to understand the unique dynamics of identity theft committed by family members. David and I worked together to manage these opportunities strategically, maximizing the educational and advocacy benefits while protecting Elena and our family life from unwanted scrutiny. The book contract that emerged from this media attention provided an opportunity to tell my complete story while also offering comprehensive guidance for other victims of family-based financial fraud. Writing the book required revisiting painful memories and emotions that I had largely processed through therapy, but the potential to help thousands of readers who might be facing similar situations made the emotional challenge worthwhile. David served as both editor and emotional support throughout the writing process, helping me balance honesty about the trauma with hope about recovery and resilience. The final chapter of the book addressed the question that readers and audience members asked most frequently: whether I had any regret about pursuing criminal charges against Amanda and maintaining boundaries that prevented family reconciliation. My answer evolved over the years of writing and reflection, ultimately settling on a clear recognition that accountability and consequences were essential elements of justice that benefited both victims and perpetrators, even when the relationships involved were familial. Amanda's continued criminal behavior after her release confirmed that leniency and family loyalty were inadequate responses to serious criminal behavior patterns. The book's publication coincided with Elena's third birthday, marking a period of personal and professional fulfillment that seemed impossible to imagine during the darkest days of dealing with Amanda's identity theft. The positive reviews and reader responses confirmed that my story resonated with many people who had experienced various forms of family betrayal and manipulation, extending the impact of my advocacy work beyond financial fraud to include broader themes of trust, accountability, and recovery. The success of the book also created new opportunities for speaking and consulting work that would continue the mission of educating and protecting potential victims. The family therapy sessions that David and I began as Elena grew older reflected our commitment to creating healthy communication patterns and relationship dynamics that would protect our daughter from the types of manipulation and boundary violations that had characterized my childhood experience. Working with Dr. Martinez, a family therapist who specialized in healthy boundary development, we explored how to balance openness and trust with appropriate caution and protection. These sessions reinforced the importance of teaching Elena to recognize and respond to manipulation while also maintaining the capacity for genuine intimacy and family connection. The playground conversation with another parent that led to the discovery of a new identity theft case demonstrated how the advocacy work had become integrated into my daily life and personal relationships. Sarah, a mother I had befriended at Elena's preschool, mentioned financial problems that seemed suspicious when examined through my professional lens. Her description of unexpected credit card bills and mortgage payment changes matched the pattern of family-based identity theft so closely that I offered to help her investigate the situation further. The discovery that her teenage son had been using her personal information to fund his gaming and social activities provided another opportunity to apply the prevention and recovery strategies I had developed. Working with Sarah through her family's identity theft crisis reinforced the universality of the dynamics I had experienced with Amanda while also highlighting how prevention education could minimize both financial damage and family trauma. Sarah's early recognition of the problem, combined with immediate implementation of protective measures and appropriate consequences for her son, prevented the escalation that had characterized Amanda's criminal behavior. The positive outcome of Sarah's case demonstrated the effectiveness of the educational and prevention strategies that had emerged from my own painful experience. The 10th anniversary of Amanda's original arrest passed quietly, marked by reflection on the journey from victim to advocate and the family life that had grown out of the ashes of betrayal and violation. Elena was now a confident and secure 5-year-old who knew nothing of the family drama that had preceded her birth, growing up in an environment of honesty and accountability that contrasted sharply with the dysfunction that had enabled Amanda's criminal behavior. The anniversary felt like a celebration of survival and growth, rather than a commemoration of trauma, representing how completely my life had been transformed through healing and purpose. The news of Amanda's death from a drug overdose in a Denver homeless shelter came through my father's phone call on a snowy December evening, bringing closure to a story that had shaped my adult life in ways both devastating and ultimately redemptive. The circumstances of her death reflected the complete deterioration of someone who had once possessed intelligence and charm but had consistently chosen criminal behavior and substance abuse over accountability and genuine change. While I felt sadness for the waste of human potential and the pain her death would cause Rachel and my parents, I also experienced relief that the threat she had represented to my family's security was finally and permanently resolved. The decision not to attend Amanda's funeral reflected the boundaries I had maintained consistently since discovering her identity theft crimes, prioritizing my family's emotional well-being and security over traditional expectations about family loyalty and mourning rituals. David supported this decision completely, understanding that Amanda's death did not erase the harm she had caused or create obligations for me to participate in ceremonies that might undermine the healing and protection I had worked so hard to achieve. The grief I experienced was for the sister I had hoped Amanda might become rather than mourning for the person she had actually been. The college scholarship fund that David and I established in Rachel's name represented our desire to support the family member who had been most victimized by Amanda's criminal behavior while also creating something positive from the tragedy of Amanda's wasted life. Rachel's acceptance to Arizona State University with plans to study social work suggested that she had transformed her childhood trauma into motivation for helping others, following a path similar to my own journey from victim to advocate. The scholarship fund would support other young people who had experienced family trauma and dysfunction, extending the circle of healing and hope that had grown out of my experience with identity theft. The final lesson that emerged from the decade-long journey from Amanda's initial crimes to her eventual death was the recognition that recovery from family betrayal required not just healing from trauma but also the courage to build entirely new definitions of family and security. The life David and I had created with Elena was stronger and more authentic than anything I had experienced before Amanda's crimes, because it was built on foundations of choice, honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation and historical connection. The identity theft that had once seemed like the destruction of my world had ultimately become the catalyst for creating something far better than what had been lost. Standing in Elena's bedroom as she slept peacefully, surrounded by the security and love that David and I had worked so hard to create, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led to this moment of complete contentment and purpose. The woman who had once been devastated by her sister's betrayal had become someone who could protect not only her own family but countless others from similar harm, transforming personal trauma into professional expertise and advocacy that would continue long after the pain of Amanda's crimes had faded into distant memory. The story that had begun with identity theft and family destruction had ultimately become one of resilience, recovery, and the power of choosing genuine security over the illusion of family loyalty. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.